welcome back to Keep Indiana Learning. My name is Tim Arnold, and I'm a digital learning coach with Keep Indiana Learning. Today, I'm here with my fellow digital learning coaches, Brenny Coomer, Nicole Nelson, and Sara Atkinson for the latest episode of our book study series, Keep Indiana Reading, The Shift to Student-Led Edition. Today, our focus will be Chapter 6, from formative assessment, as a teacher tool to a metacognitive tool for learners. Before we dive in, let's do some introductions. Ladies, take it away.
Hello, I'm Nicole Nelson from Lewis Cass Schools. This is my 24th year in education and my third year here as the technology integration specialist. And I'm glad to be here with you all today.
Hi there, my name is Sara Atkinson. I am the instructional technology coordinator for Duneland School Corporation, which is way up north in Chesterton, Indiana. Before I did that, I had the privilege of serving as an instructional coach and also as an elementary teacher.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brenny Coomer. I'm from Columbus, Indiana, from Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation, where I'm the Assistant Director of EdTech. My background is teaching secondary social studies in middle school and high school. This is my 9th year in education. I thought it was 8 until I counted back a few days ago and was like, no, I've been doing this for 1 year more. And I come from a UDL district, so love talking about this topic. And this chapter has been one of my favorites so far.
And I'm Tim Arnold from Richmond Community Schools. I'm a 34-year public school educator, 26 years in the 7 through 12 social studies classroom, and in my 8th as a district e-learning specialist. I'm also a fellow Keep Indiana Learning DLC and a HEC board member. So this chapter 6, we actually just did this with a blended learning cadre here in my district yesterday. And this opening scene with the Apple Watch speaks to me, and I bet to Brenny, because I know she's a runner as well. But when you get the feedback that you get during the process, focusing the learner or the exerciser in the case of the story, and allowing them to take action, I felt those words. Because if you've ever gotten a message from your watch that says you're not having a very good workout, I felt that. So you adjust and you make changes. So what did you guys think about the early part of this chapter?
I loved it. I'm with you, Tim. I'm a runner. I'm like a psycho. So I have my Apple Watch, but I also have a Garmin. I'm not double watched today, but I prefer my Garmin for running, and it does give you feedback. And sometimes you do a run and you're like, oh, that was great. And then it tells you that the training was unproductive. And then I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm such a failure. So I really liked some of the analogies the authors made in this book, because I think sometimes when we only use formative data as like the score, and that's, we move on, it's almost like that feeling I get when I say that my run was unproductive. Like, it's kind of defeating when I know that there were elements of it that were better. So I really loved the opening of that with this chapter.
Yeah, same. I used to run. I haven't so much anymore, but I remember one run in particular as I was training for a marathon, and I used to run with my phone, same as Katie was saying at the beginning of the chapter. And my phone died like 2 miles into the run, and it was like my last run before the biggie, whatever. And so I went like 6 miles with nothing, no music, no pacing in my ear saying, hey, you're on track. So after that, I knew that I could do anything. I got this.
I wish I had a good running example, but I'm not a runner. I always say, if I'm running, you better be running too, because it's after both of us. But anyway, something that was in the book that I wrote it down because it really stuck out for me was the phrase collecting feedback while I blank. So as adults, think of how many tasks you do on a regular basis that you're collecting feedback, and that's a good thing. So a lot of times the idea of things that we do at school that involve feedback are kind of stigmatized because they're seen as like this be all and end all judgment of how you perform. But think of all the opportunities in our daily life where we're asking for feedback. So the idea of the running and the Apple Watch and things like that, it made me think of things like cooking and your car. Like, how many times have you been driving down the road and the check engine light comes on? You're like, oh my gosh, I am so glad that I knew something was up before I broke down and I'm stranded. Just there's so many opportunities in regular life where feedback is a good thing. Why can't it be a good thing in the classroom as well?
Yeah, well said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the things that I wrote down or highlighted early in the chapter was the idea. One of the things they discuss in this chapter is students learning how to create their own success criteria. So I wanted to preface it by saying that, because what I wrote in the margin to myself was this makes it really incumbent on teachers to give students a wide variety of learning experiences as a method of discovery for their own, into their own learning preferences. If we want them to design that success criteria, they got to have the widest breadth of experiences available to find things that, okay, I'm comfortable here, but maybe I'm not learning. I'm uncomfortable here and I'm learning, or wow, I don't think this is for me yet, somewhere in there. And without that wide breadth of experience, I think it would be difficult for some to be able to create that success criteria.
Yeah. I liked in the chapter when they talked about seeing an exemplar piece, but not understanding why does that meet the criteria, or why does that meet the rubric guidelines? What is so exemplar about that piece? And so to analyze that with students and let them go through that process of speaking to the why is this good, and that sort of thing.
Agreed. And I put was one of my standout quotes from the chapter, the one that really resonated with me, is that we collect data about our students, but we don't necessarily collect data for them to use. So I think having them kind of look at these success criteria pieces starts that conversation and gets them thinking about their performance and data in a much more positive way, kind of like what Sara was saying. And I think that it really is going to require a lot of unlearning on the student's part to be able to have those productive conversations, as well as the teacher. I think some of us, that was our experience in school. So it's hard to think about things other than just the grade or the score. It's a reflection piece, and it's a metric to help us become better learners and become expert learners and be able to problem solve and be resourceful and knowledgeable. And it's a resource that we should leverage. And I love the different strategies in here that kind of give you a roadmap for doing that, because I don't think this is something that we're really necessarily taught in teacher prep programs. It's kind of like have the students reflect. Okay, move on to the next thing. It's not necessarily giving explicit strategies. And I love that they highlighted that in this book.
Yeah, I think the diagrams and the strategies and the examples that they gave were perfect. For me, that real focus is, many times I've said it, and I know others have said it, we're not allowed to complain about students' lack of self-sufficiency if we don't provide the time and the method and the process for them to develop that. So the purpose of formative assessments and the discussions that follow is reflection and future planning. And if we're not willing to put that time in and make time for that, then we really can't complain on the backside. So that was important for me to kind of verbalize that and say that and think, okay, yeah, it's important, so I've got to make time for it because it is important, or I'm not going to get that result at the end of the day that I really want.
Yeah, you talked about how the book provides examples and templates and all of the images for how this looks in the classroom. One of the things that they talked about in the book was a reference to a video about highlighting mistakes and a shift in the grading policy. We're going to provide a link to that video that I grabbed from YouTube in the description of this video, because that was the first place that I went to look for an example of what did those conversations look like when students are giving feedback to each other and providing comments about their learning. The teacher was talking about how she doesn't put a grade on their assessments, that she just highlights where the errors are. And then then they have a conversation and she shows the errors and students discuss, what was wrong with this one? What should they have done? What should this have looked like? And she says that it normalizes the process of making mistakes and allows students to take more risks. And you could just see the confidence of the students that were in that room and the belief that they have in themselves as learners when the emphasis isn't on the grade, but on the process.
I really like what you said, Nicole. The idea of the highlighting the errors versus putting a grade at the top of the paper makes a huge impact. My district this year made the switch at the elementary level to standards-based grading. And before we did that, we took a really close look at the research that's available on grades and how those impact students, not just academically, but socially and emotionally. And there's a lot of good reading out there on the topic, but something that we noticed was when you do put that grade on the top of the paper, a lot of times, Nicole, like you said, students will look at that grade and it's done. They either got an A+ or they got something else, and a lot of times they don't go any further than just checking that grade. But also, there's some reading out there too that suggests that students are internalizing those grades, so they become those grades. So when students are given a grade versus actionable specific feedback, they're not just not having that opportunity to gauge their own learning and work on that feedback, but they're also beginning to assign like their identity to that grade. So going beyond just marking up our papers the way that we traditionally have can have a really great impact, not just on their learning, but also on their social emotional development.
I feel like you guys just said something really insightful, and I don't feel like I have something that's going to sound as well versed. So I'm just going to say retweet to both everything that you two just said, because I love it.
Yeah, Sarah, that was a very powerful idea that you just laid out there. And you know, the basic message that that's sending by not putting that grade on top is that this isn't done, right? We're not done. This is ongoing, and it shows that, you know, one of the themes they talked about that was feedback as formative oriented versus feedback as summative oriented. Just keeping it in that formative realm helps students continue their learning and always learn that lesson that this isn't over, right? This isn't a one-time and done item. This is something we're going to continue working and growing with. So yeah, I couldn't say it any better than you said it there. So those folks that are watching this, that's the part you want to snip and take from this one, because that was pretty well said. So one of the other strategies they talked about was facilitating classroom discussion around formative assessments. And I love that they gave a word for this. I'd never come across the word ExamWrapper. I could think of a lot of examples that I would have done post-test, but I don't believe I ever did any of these pre-test or pre-assessment. So I love that I've got a word for that now that I can take out there and use. But what did you guys think about that ExamWrapper idea?
I had never heard of that before either, and I loved it. And then my mind went all like cheesy puns, like give kids candy, like candy wrapper, because that's where my mind goes. But I loved it. And I don't think I did a whole lot of pre-assessment conversation either. And we have block schedule in our high schools, and it's always kind of been like, how do you break up that 88-minute class period in an efficient way? And I love that they had even give you really a roadmap to do this. So if you're doing a whole group rotation, this is a way of chunking those activities to where you have a conversation before you introduce this, talk about those pre-assessment questions, take the tests, and then have those conversations afterwards. And that's where the good stuff happens, is when you're having that reflection afterwards and the students are thinking about their thinking. That's so much more higher level thinking than turning in the test, you grade it, and you just give it back.
I saw the value in, we've been looking a lot into AI and using AI prompts with students. And one of the tools that we've been using is School AI. And they have a space that's already created for students to talk about their test. How did the test go was the title of the space. And it prompts them with, what did you do to study for this test? How successful did you think that you were? Why do you think that you were successful? And they can, it could be one of the, like, would you rather just have a conversation independently with an AI chatbot, or do you want to have this conversation with your peers in a group? But they're still getting the same content out of reflection out of the activity. where they're discussing some of those kinds of post-test questions.
I really like that idea. I had to write it down for myself there. I also had never heard of an ExamWrapper before, but I do remember in college something similar to that. I don't think anyone called it that though, but in the book they have the ExamWrapper and then some ideas for different questions that you can include in that before the exam and after the exam moment. And one that I noted for later was summarize the feedback that you will use in the future. And so that's going beyond just taking in the feedback, but also analyzing that and planning based on that. So the book also said that the purpose of an assessment is for that reflection and collective planning. So the idea of having students summarize the feedback they've been given gives them the opportunity to reflect on it, but then also begin to make a plan of how they're going to improve in the future.
So the third strategy that they provided was to work towards memorializing multiple means of feedback. And again, a very important idea. No matter which tool, whether it's paper and pencil, we're lucky enough to be in a Canvas district, so e-portfolios are literally built into Canvas, and every kid can have one. They do have one, and you can add stuff throughout the year and from grade level to grade level. But what a tremendous idea to find a way for students to pull examples of things that they felt they were successful on, and probably more importantly, things that they felt they weren't successful on, to reflect on, and then to actually do the reflection on those pieces. And I really, really liked that they offered multiple tools to do that with. I'm kind of on a flip kick right now, and so to me that would be an ideal one to have students really reflect on some assessment or some feedback that they've been given in a quick way that they can go back and watch later. And they can say, okay, so this is how I felt. What do I think now? What changes did I make? What am I doing differently because of the feedback that I was given and the reflection that I did on that for myself?
I'm kind of been on a Canva kick. So my mind went to Canva right away thinking about this. They have some nice templates in there for like journaling and that type of piece. But because it's so rich with different tools, students don't have to just type out a response. They can put pictures of the artifacts and things that they, created in the class and reflected on. They can do audio and video all within that platform. So I think we have so many tools out there that give students multiple means to represent their feedback and reflect on it, that it would be, not good to not utilize those tools. But I think we could also give students paper options as well. Some students like to have the pen to paper, to have that diary or journal to reflect on it. And I love that they talked about having students share it with their peers too. So it's not just, okay, write in your journal, do your activity, reflect, then we move on to the next thing. I love the idea of having a learning community in the classroom where students share their growth and their journey and how they've reflected on their learning with another classmate, because that might even spark further conversation and a deeper learning experience for everyone.
Yeah, Brenny, that's what I was going to mention also, is having time for students to go back and look at where they've come from and the growth that they have had throughout the year or even in previous years, but to make sure to provide that time for them to look back on, they're collecting all of this feedback and they're journaling on different projects, but to allow time to go back and look at the growth that they've seen is beneficial too.
And how easy would it be just to put together, give every student a Google slide document, and every time they have a formative assessment, they fill out a short form on a Google slide, or just type in a text box on what worked for them and to summarize the feedback they got. It could be something super simple, and the student would have that to go back and review for the next time they take an assessment. And that way they're getting better and better at preparing themselves and recognizing what their own learning preferences are, like you said, Tim, earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, as we come to the end here of Chapter 6, a couple of reflection questions. for us all to think about, what form do formative assessments typically take in your class? Would you describe them as assessments as learning or of learning? Do you think they're more feedback oriented or summative oriented? Formative oriented or summative oriented? And then how might building metacognitive routines around formative assessments change the way your students think about them? Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. And as always, this session and all of the sessions will be on a playlist in the Keep Indiana Learning YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us.